do hope you're excited for an episode featuring AP-5, the ultimate droid caricature of Alan Rickman, because that's exactly what you're going to get in this week's episode of Star Wars Rebels. Never have I seen an episode of Star Wars Rebels which I simultaneously love and hate all at the same time. This week's episode featured a lot of the character of AP-5, who I think is one of the most funny droids that I have ever seen, and his relationship with Chopper is always fun to see when it's used sparingly. But in this week's episode, we get to see their shenanigans, I think, a little bit too much. This is a case of too much of a good thing, actually. That being said, though, this week's episode was very interesting in the fact that it mostly focused on the characters of Chopper, AP-5, and Wedge Antilles, a fan favorite of the Star Wars fandom. The main story in this week's episode is that Wedge Antilles, Chopper, and AP-5 are going to infiltrate an Imperial base and get these codes to Lothal. The problem is when they're doing this, there is this Imperial scouting unit which has actually realized what they are doing, and they are trying to take over Chopper and basically manually control him so they can sneak in, act as sort of this mole, get some information about the rebels and where their base is, so that they can give it to Thrawn and look like a bunch of badasses. I did like the fact that these Imperial reconnaissance team members reminded me a lot of the character of Lobot from Empire Strikes Back, a character whose name isn't even mentioned in the movie at all. I just remember it because they made an action figure of the guy. But essentially, they're like these cyborg people. They got these like weird apparatuses on their heads, and they also seem to be incredibly monotone as well, which actually adds to a little bit of humor in this week's episode. And speaking of which, Chopper and AP-5. These guys are basically like a more extreme R2-D2 and C-3PO. They're very similar in the way that they constantly bicker with each other like an old married couple. However, they're both so up their very own robot asses. AP-5 in particular, who thinks he's just the absolute superior being, and the fact that his voice sounds a lot like the late great Alan Rickman just makes his humor all the more dry and all the more funny. He's really the star of this episode, although it's really annoying when Chopper actually ends up getting taken over by this Imperial base, and they sort of use him as their very own decoy. Nobody believes AP-5. It's annoying as shit. It kind of comes into question, how smart are these rebels anyway? I mean, it just seemed convenient for the plot for them to just keep ignoring AP-5. And I get it, he's got a somewhat abrasive personality, but he's also a droid who has a job to do, and he realizes that there's something up with Chopper, and they don't believe him until the very end of the freaking episode. And the way the episode ends is just insane. You know, like, the rules of Star Wars get broken all the time, but when they learn that Chopper is actually being controlled by this Imperial reconnaissance team, they decide to basically reverse the polarity, so to speak. What I mean by this is they're able to send out this signal, which the Imperials are sending right back at them, which not only destroys all of their computers, but somehow makes their frigging ship explode. And they did it all just by sending out an electrical signal. Is it that easy to take down the freaking Imperials after this? I mean, couldn't they find a way to sort of like send in some droids and like send their signals out to all these ships and destroy them? Because we're probably never going to see this concept again. It's just ridiculous, honestly. That being said, though, if you're willing to just let that go and take this episode for what it is, which is a goofy droid episode, then you're going to get some enjoyment out of it. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Star Wars Rebels? Like I said, this episode is very middle of the road for me. I love AP-5 and he's a really fun character, but watching like 20 minutes of him is a little strange. It feels just a little bloated, like we're seeing the same joke over and over again. And I wish we could have done a little bit more with some Wedge Antilles scenes, who's mostly in the background for most of this episode. Basically he's just there to like fly them to the Imperial base and to make jokes about the fact that AP-5 keeps walking in on him when he's trying to use the toilet. Excuse me, the refresher. That's what they call toilets in the Star Wars universe, and I think this might be the very first mention, or even like view we've ever seen of like what a bathroom is like in the Star Wars universe. So if you've ever wanted to see that, check it out. I gotta give him credit for taking the high road and not doing a fart joke. Really though, what I loved about this episode was probably that big final scene at the very end, where they finally got Chopper back, they destroyed the Imperial reconnaissance team, and AP-5 had been jettisoned
from the ghost ship, and he's just floating around aimlessly in space. And he's actually content with his situation, mostly because I think he's just so obsessed with his own superiority, but the fact that he's just doesn't have to be a part of any faction anymore and he can just relax. There are all these like flying aliens, which are called Nibre, which are flying around in space and going around him, and he's finally at peace. He starts to sing, which is really funny, and then suddenly the ghost ship comes back and he could not be more pissed off. It was a really funny end to an otherwise pleasant episode of the series, but like I said, there are just some glaring plot holes and weird things going on in this episode. Like, when Chopper's being taken over by the Imperial Reconnaissance Team, he actually goes in the ship and he lures all the members of the crew down to the bottom, and then he, like, blocks it off and locks them in there, and they can't do anything to get out. Can Ezra not use the Force or the lightsaber that he conveniently does not have on him to actually do this? Is it really that weird? Whatever. It leads to a scene with Chopper using blasters while flying around in space, so I guess it's worth it. Really, though, this was just an okay episode of Star Wars Rebels, but it certainly had some funny moments, and it's going to be the perfect downer episode before we move to next week's, which is, I think, going to be maybe the biggest episode of the entire season, and maybe the biggest episode of Star Wars Rebels yet, where it looks like Darth Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi are about to have a rematch on the dusty planet of Tatooine. That's right, the twin suns are rising on the ultimate rematch in the Star Wars saga. And no, there's not really that much tension because, of course, Obi-Wan is alive in Episode 4. Still, I can't wait to see what's going to happen here, if Maul is actually going to be defeated or if he's going to make some sort of grand escape. It's going to be a tense episode, and I think that's something that all Star Wars fans need to check out, so stay tuned for that one. But this one right here, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Just an average episode, but it certainly wasn't inoffensive, and it did have some funny moments, and I could watch AP-5 float through space and sing all day long. So check it out, Star Wars fans. If any of you guys did watch this week's episode, make sure to tell me what you thought about it in the comments section below. Did you like this week's episode all about Chopper and AP-5? Are you excited for the Obi-Wan Darth Maul rematch? What do you think's going to go down? What do you want to see from the rest of this season of Star Wars Rebels? Please tell me in the comments section. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe for all things Star Wars and anime related. Please leave me a comment or two. I would love to talk with you guys about this week's episode. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. I'd really appreciate it. So I will see you guys next time. And as always, stay dandy, baby.